if I project, can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. Well, what a wonderful evening for us to gather, and very apropos as we're here at the Propylaeum, which started the conversation on women's rights in central Indianapolis. And so here with us, we are going to have a robust conversation about somewhat bleak, but also very aspirational data points that will lead us into, hopefully, a longer and broader conversation that you'll take home to your loved ones and your community to continue to look at the empowerment of women and girls ongoing. So first off, Danielle, can you tell us why we are here today and how this Girls Report and the Girl Coalition of Indiana got started?
Well, so taking us back a couple of years, this is the second Indiana Girl Report, 2 years in a row, and it actually came to us through an opportunity through the Lilly Endowment. And so I know the endowment is in the room, so thank you. You allow people to do unique and really important work. And so people often refer to the Girl Scouts as experts in girls. We've been around for 110 years. We're an incredibly trusted brand. But more than that, we have decades and decades of thousands and millions of women and girls who are in the program who go on to be the leaders of lots of things, right? But it felt like, and coming from the State House myself and being a female, sometimes you need more than just that. You need more than just brand recognition. You need somewhat more than just centuries of experience with girls. And so it felt like it was a really important time for us to come armed with information that would potentially help people stand up and take notice. That our girls are in a state of crisis. Our girls are uniquely different than males, and they need somebody to pay attention to their story. And I think they're not a fringe. We're 51+%. And it's often treated like we're a minority group, but yet not being at the table, not being considered first and foremost, being a secondary thought to their male counterparts, had become more and more the constant, and it shouldn't be that way. So it felt like it was a really right time, and with the endowment support, we were able to partner with the Indiana Youth Institute. So a huge shout out to them. Again, coming from the State House, people take notice. They are the gold standard of data. And so we were able to commission this report with them because we felt like telling the girls' story uniquely separate from the male story was really important. And so I'm glad we've done this work, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Absolutely. And just a little bit further a plug for Indiana Youth Institute. The Kids Count report is done in 52 states plus territories in the United States, and it is predominantly used by school corporations to take a look at how youth are doing in wellness and other social and physical sectors within developing youth programming. So kudos to the Girl Scouts for isolating specifically the girls component of this to not only prove it and drive it through data science, but ultimately promote and position what needs to change as we transition from focusing on girls and youth to women empowered to grow the economics of central Indiana. So Tamara, to you, the Women's Report is coming out. And it's a beautiful continuum from where we're at with the Girls Report today to how we can prosper as a central Indiana community in understanding the juxtapositions between what's happening with our girls, what is currently being faced and challenged by women, and how we can better that for our girls as they age. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the Women's Report and some key things that we'll be looking to reading as it comes out in a few weeks.
So I am not going to be as articulate as Danielle because her report is already out. And ours is already out. So I have my notes right here.
I almost shied away from tonight.
So here's what we know. The Institute for Women's Policy and Research that keeps a report card on states across the country gives Indiana a big fat D. And the research I've looked at bears that out. When I stepped into this position at the beginning of last year, I knew, and what I wanted for Women's Fund is to be experts on the experience of women and girls in central Indiana. But when I looked around, I didn't see a lot of sources for the data and information that we need. And as I talked to the many women and girls serving not-for-profits that we work with, they didn't have that information either. And I looked at the great work that Girl Scout, Girl Coalition, and IYI were doing and realized that there needed to be a counterpart to that talked about the experience of women across central Indiana. And so I also have to thank the people who made our report possible, and that is Marion County Public Health Department, Audio Chuck, Glick Philanthropies, and the Indianapolis Foundation. So we decided to work with the Polis Center at Indiana University, Indianapolis. I gotta get used to saying that. To assemble this report that covers health, it covers economic mobility and workforce, it covers transportation, political involvement, all of just the gamut of women's lives to show what's there, because I truly believe that if we can't name it, then we can't change anything. We know there's a D there, but we need the information behind that. And what's exciting, Danielle and I have talked about, and I don't know if there's any other state that has it, so we're just gonna start saying Indiana's the only state that has it. We have an unprecedented understanding of what it means now to be a woman or a girl. We have these two reports, and if you count the Senior Fund SOAR report, State of Aging, which is not specifically women, but it is disaggregated, we know what it is like for women and girls from the time they are born till the time they become senior citizens. And so the question is now, what are we gonna do about it? How are we going to change the things that are wrong and seize the opportunities?
Phenomenal. Let's start with girls first. There is a very aspirational data point. It is quite a bleak report, but there is an aspirational data point that says 9 out of 10 girls have a trusted adult mentor within their lives. However, 22% of the same population say they are not comfortable in discussing personal issues with their parents. So as we look at this, we're really extending from the girls' report to the upcoming women's report on how do we, as trusted adults in this room, become a community in support of our girls? What are some major initiatives that both the Girl Coalition of Indiana and specifically naming in this report that drives partnership and community to help our young women?
Yeah, so if you stay in the bleak, it's a lot, right? And so we too were looking for, so the now what? Yeah. And I will say there's a lot of research around it takes 5 caring adults in a youth's life, right? And those 5 caring adults can be any 5. It doesn't have to be a parent. Right. So there is a lot of hope that 9 out of 10 said they feel like they have that person. But that 22% you referenced is actually twice as many. So more girls compared to boys feel like they can't go to their parents. And so I do think our girl report is trying to get underneath. Why do girls feel that way? Is it that girls really feel that way, or boys are less likely to talk about feeling that way, right? But I think we really have turned to the now what. And so what does that mean for educators? What does that mean for caregivers? We know that 31% of girls in Indiana, which is the highest of all the neighboring states, feel like they have nowhere to go after school or the weekends, and they're not involved in something, right? I know. And so, and I think we all think about the child we know. I have 4 daughters, right? You look at the ones around you, but you have to look just past that, right? It's all the girls, and they're experiencing a lot of hardship. So what can we do? We can make suggestions. We can look at after school time. We can look at policy around the resources for after school care and enrichment opportunities. Things like Girl Scouts, right? I think that's part of the secret sauce in Girl Scouts. They have a role model and a troop leader, and so it's all of those pieces. It's talking to parents. It's getting this information to them. I think oftentimes when things are challenging, financial, hard, like where do you put your resources? It is in watching what your child is indicating they might need, and it might be those opportunities. So there's a lot of things in our report that point to recommendations, and it's prevention as well as ongoing supports. And some of our supports are really what I would say are close to home, but then some of them are systemic, and I think we have to work in both places.
It's such a key comment about these, as you address it in the report, positive childhood experiences being prevention. In the clinical field with the public health work that is being done across central Indiana, we talk a lot about adverse childhood experiences, and we've done these very programmatic things and this naming, right? So Tamara, as we talk about what is ALICE and what is a continued adverse childhood experiences as we become adults, how does that impact our current women in central Indiana that are facing these serious struggles when it comes to financial stability, transportation issues, and so forth?
So I was thinking as you were speaking, like this points to the importance of 2-gen approaches. Because the reality is, you talk about, girls and young women needing someone to lean on, talk to their parents. Well, who is usually in charge of the caregiving and nurturing in a household? It's mom, it's women. But then you look at, the mental health statistics we brought up. Women 18 to 34 are most likely to report feeling depression, about 30% of them. Women are most of the people using our inadequate transportation system. Women are most of the people being evicted. Yeah. Women only make 70 cents on the dollar than men. Women of color make even less. So now you look at women and the ways they're unsupported, and then you don't have to wonder why that many women are not able to be the support that girls need as they are growing. So I think it points to the need for more intergenerational programming and more partnerships between people like the Women's Fund and Girl Scouts and Girl Co, because we have to lift both or else it doesn't work.
Absolutely. I think so important, the programmatic approaches across this entire continuum. Can you share a little bit about some of the programs that are being spearheaded today through the Women's Fund, and then how that could tie back in outreach to youth prevention, and similar on the reverse for the Girl Scouts?
So one of the new programs that we have that I'm really excited about, it's a partnership with the Center of Wellness for Urban Women. I think many of you probably know Rhonda Bayless and her wonderful program. It's actually part of a national, this is a long name, so clearly no one in marketing was around thinking about this. The National Philanthropic Collaborative of Young Women's Initiatives. So we are now part of that cohort, which includes women's funds and foundations all over the country. And it's supported by a private family foundation. And the idea is we've partnered with CWU to assemble a Young Women's Advisory Council. And we are funding them and teaching them, helping them identify the challenges that they feel like they face in their community. They're developing an action plan, and we are funding them to actually execute their action plan. And we're also working very closely with Women for Change. I see Angie Carclich back there. Women for Change has been doing a lot of work with those young women, teaching them how to advocate for themselves, how to organize in the community. And I think that is so powerful. We have young women between 18 and 24 who are using their voices, and we're actually coaching them in order to change what they see that's wrong. And you have older women who are working with those younger women to help them be stronger.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Thank you. Danielle from the Girls Co?
So I don't really know where to start. I would say there's quite a bit actually. So again, through this unique work and this funding through the endowment, part of our work has been in the top 20 most socioeconomically challenged counties in the state of Indiana. And in those counties, we've done 74 listening sessions. And those listening sessions are with families and girls and community members to really take data is one thing, but then stories, and then what is the intersectionality of what do they need in that community that they can support and they would like resources to implement, and then how can we come alongside. So that has been one thing. But I would say the other thing that is more of the systemic space, and I'm going to talk about Girl Scouts too, but the systemic space is we have created a statewide advisory. So utilizing our data, the statewide advisory has people like Judge Rush, right, of the Children's Commission, Dr. Box, Brandon Brown of the Mind Trust. So people who are truly influencers who we hope can help kind of continue to spread the word of the report into different subsets of kind of our society, and really help us spread the story so that we can implement change. We've also, for the first time at Girl Scouts, we've registered as not only education advocacy, but lobbyists.
Oh, wow.
We want to be in the State House with this data. We want to be able to take a stand on things that we think are important, especially when it feels like there's only 27% of our elected officials in the state of Indiana are women. And we know when women are not at the table, that's when we're forgotten. And so we think that's an important space to step into. And then the Girl Scout space, right? This is like, this is the joy. So we have 10,000 volunteers. We are bringing them trauma-informed professional development. We're bringing them mental health first aid professional development. So now they're servicing 12 and 10 young girls in their troop. And so how can they identify and get support when they need it for those girls? And then we just were a recipient of $100,000, actually 99. That's so hard to say, from the Colts for kicking the stigma. And so we have, through our national badge portfolio of Girl Scouts, in partnership with NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness, our badge curriculum is for kindergarten through 12th grade, and we'll be implementing that at all of our summer camps, for which we operate 5. So every girl will be getting curriculum around mental health, and it's not about because I'm not well, it's about how to stay well. So there's just, I would say, all of these layers of work that we're doing, and it's truly coming together in a really great way, powerful way.
That's phenomenal. Now, we've talked quite a bit about this as a recommendation, and often recommendations make it into public policy. We have, in both Senate and House in the state, a focus on family and children. If you were to promote a bill today, based upon the data science and the information and all the collective listening, what would be one key bill push that you would want to see within our state house? Sure, you can take 3. You can take 3.
I haven't had
Perfect.
One, I would say, when we went to do the girls report, and I don't know if you found this in the women's report, a lot of the data that we wanted to pull wasn't available in a disaggregatable way by gender, because it wasn't collected in that way. So I would love to see a bill in our state house that is kind of a baseline expectation for any new data that is going to be collected from any agency in the state of Indiana has to be disaggregatable by gender. That would be one bill. I think a second bill I would love to see, and I don't know if this is a bill or an agency or a governor change, but I would like the Women's Commission to be women and girls. And third,
And possibly more than one FT?
Yeah,
Okay, yes.
No, right? When I met her, I believe she was one FT, one full-time person for this whole commission, right? Which just really, frankly, does speak to, I think, the level of where our policymakers place women in Indiana. But I would say the third is mental health. I mean, there's so many, but I would say we have so many barriers right now in our state for licensure. Prep programs into mental health. We don't have interstate reciprocity in a lot of the mental health spaces. So I would say we need to open up those barriers so that our mental health professionals and social workers can get to the people who need it most, which is, in the case of our report, the girls, the women. And so until we bring more professionals to meet the needs of families and youth, I think we're going to continue to fight an uphill battle.
I would say a couple of things. In addition to that disaggregated by gender, we tried really hard. We wanted this report to look at women in all the ways they show up in the world. Because I always say sexism affects us all, but the way it affects us depends on all of our intersecting identities. And so if you think it's hard to find women's information, it's even harder to find what does this mean for women who are immigrants? What does this mean for, LGBTQ women? Like all of those different intersections. And so I wish there were more data that was disaggregated in that way and fully. I'd also like to see improvements to our transportation system. Transportation stands in the way, a lot of the problems, and I know we're going to talk about this later, a lot of these issues are so intersected. We did a webinar with Dr. Kane and Dr. Weaver about infant maternal mortality earlier this year. And they said the big barrier to women getting prenatal care, which then leads to infant and maternal mortality, is actually being able to get to care. We have a transportation system that doesn't work for everyone. If you don't have a car, you're in big trouble. And being able to get doulas and knowledge of alternative maternal health and having that in a lot of different languages and having it paid for by Medicaid, which, as I understand, they allegedly earmarked money for it, but what we're hearing is they didn't release the money. So women can't access that additional help. So we can go on all night. That's six things. Yeah.
But this is such an important component, which is saying, hey, there is these very specific initiatives that we're doing that should lend to these public policies. Let's talk a little bit more about the future casting of these programs. So the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services in 2022 issued out a new 1115 Medicaid waiver. Tamara, you talked about, hey, doulas were promised in our Medicaid reimbursements, but has not yet come down from Payments Committee to really support this focus in individual population and community-based organizations to serve the population receiving the funding. So we have now nationally something called the health-related social needs. The vocabulary has changed, the needs are the same. It's still about social determinants of health. Indiana has not yet applied. Many other states have already been approved and received the funding. So as you look at transportation, as you look at all of the interconnectedness of both of your reports, what would be your wish list on a 1115 Medicaid waiver submission on health-related social needs to say, we need to fix these things through Medicaid allowable in order to provide supportive services across communities for all girls and women?
Oh.
I do want to tell the audience that I did not prep this question for both ladies.
I want to say this. My dream is, and I know we have talked about this, what I'd love to do is be able to take these two reports and actually create some working groups around this data. Don't know whether either of us have the resources to do it, but what would it look like if we could get together next year, even if we took, I don't know, infant maternal mortality, housing, I don't know, one issue, and said, can we get in the room the service providers? Can we get funders? Can we get legislators in a room to kind of figure out what we need to do? Or what would it look like if Women for Change and Women's Fund and Girl Scouts could say to the legislature, here's what we feel like ought to happen. Here are the policies. Here's where we stand on women's mental health. Here's where we stand on this issue. That's my dream, because the powerful thing, all the bad news, there's some bad news in our reports, but the awesome thing is we're the majority of the population here. The women are the majority. And I know, because I know some strong and amazing women, that if we're working together and we use our collective power, we can change some of these things.
Phenomenal.
And I'm with you in that space. I think I would add to that, I would take each of the people who are in the places of decision and I would take them to the end user experience. I think in my experience, in my career, personally and professionally, so I have a daughter with special needs who needs transportation to go to her program. And it's just on the south side of 82nd Street versus the north. And so she would have to walk half a mile to get on Indigo versus the bus that takes her as far as 82nd Street, which could drop her off at the door if they would but if you could just talk to somebody. Secondary, when I was a principal, we had a health clinic, a food pantry. This was in Lawrence Township, right? And so I had the mental health care provider in this office, the child in crisis in this office, but the two of them couldn't talk to each other because this mental health provider couldn't reach the parents who couldn't take their cell phone onto the work floor because they lose their job to get them to sign a document so that child wouldn't be sick, right? And so it was just this perpetual, so that's what I wish. I wish that we could get the people who are in places of decision to experience what it feels like for a moment, to walk in the shoes of the people they're making decisions for.
Sounds like a policy and process transformation that could very easily open up so many more services and programs without being a gatekeep or a barrier at each and every time of need, but rather a holistic approach to really have that full operation really serving our community. If you were to say your personal heart song, top priority, in this type of health-related social needs application, if you will, what would it be?
This is very, very personal and a section of the report that meant a lot to me because I'm also a caregiver. I'm caregiving for my husband who's diagnosed with early onset dementia. And the section of our report that talks about caregiving women carry a heavy load. We do most of the caregiving for our children, for our parents, for our spouses, and we are woefully unsupported. In Indiana, 1 in 4 women are providing care to someone with health issues.
Wow.
1 in 8 caring for someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, like I am. And we are not supported even, so you think about single moms and you think about child care. And this is a stat that like stood out to me and gave me pause. So Marion County only has enough spots, licensed childcare spots, to meet 84% of the need. But Hendricks County only has enough spots to meet 46% of the need. Now, what do you do if you're a single parent? What do you do? Like, how are people who are caregiving for people who are ill and for not ill, even just your children? Like that's a tremendous, now you talk about the effect on then girls and children if their mother can't find adequate childcare. So that was a real heart tugger for me as someone who is caregiving and knowing the lack of support and knowing the silliness where you talk to this agency and they're like, go over here, and they're like, no, go over here, you know. And we have resources.
Yeah, I almost chuckled, like your vocabulary you use in
know?
the question, like that is almost impossible for the average person to understand. Like the Social Security letter, that's just not okay. And so,
And you're
I don't even know where to start.
You're always worried that you're going to get the Social Security letter that says you no longer have support
and you have no
because
idea what you
didn't do, and you have no idea what you did.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think when you come down to exactly that, right, the vocabulary that is preferred for funding is not matching up to the community needs that are being experienced at the broader level. So what if caregiver was a workforce? What would that do in transforming our girls, our women? What are those identities that are societally female that should be compensated?
Well, what if caregivers were adequately compensated? Because again, when we look at income and financial stability for women, you know, especially women of color, over-index in the service industry. You know, this city, this area, Central Indiana, runs on the tourism. And so the women who are making the beds and cleaning up and all of those things, those are women in the service industry. In addition to women who are caretaking, they're also underpaid. All of those women who are providing services are woefully underpaid. So, you know, it is a career, it is a workforce, but it's a poorly paid one, extremely poorly paid one.
And I'd say there has been some, again, additional focus on that youth worker space and the early learning opportunities and the number of seats available, but then take that up to education and our classrooms and our teachers. And again, that's a whole other societal thing I think we could focus on, but they, in a lot of cases, because we're lacking social workers, because we're lacking mental health care providers, they become that pseudo, and they are also overworked, underpaid, often women already getting 70 cents on the dollar. And so it's just this like layer upon where to start, like an elephant one bite at a time, right? But I think that's exciting about the reports that we have that we can start.
Yep.
And I love that thoughtfulness and intentionality of saying, here are the recommendations, here is this task force, and here's the opportunity then to really apply that, not only in Central Indiana, but statewide, if these informed, thoughtful, programmatic components really come down. And hats off to you ladies for spearheading that leadership to say this is important and we're going to keep driving this. There's a lot of information in here, and I feel like as we continue to look at the data, it almost seems that we're being analysis by paralysis, right? Or paralysis analysis. So how do we, as community members here in this room today, support your initiatives and help to amplify the work that you're doing?
I would say number one, read these reports, know this story, because again, if we can't name it, we can't change it. I would say support women and girls serving organizations, because again, Marianne stole my angry line, but I'm gonna say it again, because it still makes me angry. Less than 2%. I'm sorry.
1.8, right?
The newest information from Women's Philanthropy Institute, who we're lucky to have right here, it's 1.9.
Oh.
So it's gone up by a point. But yeah, 1.8, and that's a travesty. Animals get 3%. So I'm just gonna say that. And not just Women's Fund and, Girl Scouts, but Women for Change and Coburn Place and Deborah's Place and all of those. Support women and girls serving organizations because they are woefully unsupported. But I also say that we are not going to philanthropy our way out of these problems. Women's Fund could get all the $25,000 grants we want, and it's not going to change a lot of these. So if you really want to see change, I suggest that before November 5th, you go and vote.
I was going to say, and I'm guessing someone from Women for Change might even say vote, and then also look to ways to get involved.
Yes.
Use your voice, use that opportunity, use working in the State House for 4 years, how a bill becomes a law is not at all like Schoolhouse Rock says. No, those 4 years, I've said this before, I felt like I should have paid them. There's so much education when you get involved, whether that's a poll worker or understanding or even running for office yourself. I think, again, 27% of people at the table in Indiana in places of influence and through vote are women. Things like the health app, the Apple Healthcare app on our phones didn't have women's menstruation cycles on it, and when asked why, nobody at the development table was a woman. The number of things, the number of medicines created, the number of decisions that are being made around for women are because we're not at the table. Steering wheels. We just launched something at Girl Scouts, totally just frivolous conversation for a minute, called Sim for STEM, right? And so race cars, fire suits, most things are made for women as an afterthought. And that's my, vote, run, go be involved, please.
I love that you pointed out earlier, we are not some fringe group. Like we are 52% of the population in central Indiana. So if something is not working for us, it's not working, period.
Yeah, absolutely. Ladies, shall we open it up for some audience questions? Oh, very quick. Yes, ma'am, please.
How do we access these reports?
Well, I'll start while she's taking a sip. So on your chair, I believe you had a pen that looked like this. This is a QR code to download a copy of the Indiana Girl Report, for which you can get the first and the second. And I will add, again, I would definitely look at it online because you also can disaggregate our report by zip code across the state of Indiana. So you're curious about how your girls in Hendricks County compare to the girls in Lake County, all of that is very informational, and if you serve in an organization, I hope you use our data, I hope you use it to go get big grants and lots of money to serve your missions for women and girls, and men as well.
Phenomenal. Other
I
questions?
also hope you use the Indiana Girl Report to come get big grants from Women's Fund. Our report will be out the second week of November, and the thing you should do is go to our website and make sure you're signed up to receive our communications, and you will be among the first to receive it.
Wonderful. Yes, sir.
Not that you're preaching to the choir, but everybody in here we're all the like mindset, okay? 27% of the people vote, 52% are women. What can we do to change that? I mean, we can talk and talk, but how do you reach out and get that participation? What can we do?
So what we do in Girl Scouts, and again, we have 17,000 Girl Scouts. That's not a small number. It's nothing to sneeze at, right? And so this past summer, through all of our curriculum with all the girls we touch, we taught civics and democracy. We have badges around get out and vote. I promised a Girl Scout I would vote. So we help them think about how they can encourage. We've had Girl Scouts who registered all the 18-year-olds in their high school. So we're doing our small part in that section of our world. I think we can always do more. I think we can look at policy changes around what happens in our classrooms in terms of implementing more state standards or curriculum or partnerships That's the other thing. We have a really hard time getting into our schools to do girl programming because we are single gender and we're unapologetically single gender. But because we don't serve boys, we have a harder time getting schools to say, come and teach. It used to be Girl Scouts existed in like almost every school, right? So I would say if there's things we could change, that would be one of them, because I do think we have a really strong curriculum. We have a really strong history in civics and democracy if we could reach more girls.
I think all young people need civic education. I also think media literacy, both of those things ought to be mandatory in our curriculums.
Great responses. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I want to build on to that because I don't think it's a question we can answer today, but it's something we should think about. So if we are the majority, right, and we have men who support us, what is it going to take for women to start to vote our interests?
That's a good question.
Yeah, the Indiana, I don't have the stat in front of me, but it is low. The Indiana women voter turnout is very sad, and maybe somebody in the audience can
50th in the nation.
yeah, that's just, right? So I don't know if it's neighborhood circles, policy circles, faith-based circles. I mean, we can't just say, well, it's not gonna change, right? I mean, the ripple effect. So I don't have a great answer, but I agree, our voter turnout is deplorable.
I don't know if this is President Tamara's answer or non-President Tamara's answer. I have to think. We need to decolonize our minds. I mean, because just because we're women doesn't mean that we don't grow, that we have not been nurtured by this society that has a whole lot of sexism and other isms. And so just because we are women does not mean that we vote in our best interests. And we need to change that, and that's education.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have read often a book by Dr. Arlene Geronimus called Weathering, the Extraordinary Stress in Ordinary Life in an Unjust Society. And what the book talks about is, particularly for Black, brown, marginalized, poor, mostly women, that there is an impact on their bodies, that it makes them weaker and become ill, not live as long. And how can we bring that into the conversation in a way that strengthens our argument on behalf of women?
Well, first, I would thank you, Anne, and Kathy, and Cordelia for bringing Dr. Geronimus here so we could have a community conversation about weathering. And part of it goes back to, it is because of the stress of racism and other things that women of color, immigrant communities, Appalachian communities have such poor health outcomes, is what Dr. Geronimus found out. So I think not only do we need to target those health outcomes and things like doulas and transportation, for instance, with infant maternal mortality, but it also means being unapologetic as we move forward. We got really good at that in 2020 and we're kind of backsliding of actually talking about the pressures of oppression and what effect the real physical effect that has. Because I know one of the things Dr. Geronimus talked about is, for particularly Black women, you're almost better off having children when you are younger, because every year weathering kind of wears away at our health, which is one of the reasons why we have some of the highest infant and maternal, death rates and illness rates, even like across socioeconomic levels. Last year we hosted Allison Felix for Power of Women at Women's Fund, and she's an Olympian. There's nobody in better shape than her with means, yet almost died during pregnancy.
Something we're doing, starting in January, partnering with Goodwill Industries in majority of the Indiana counties has a nurse family partnership where they're going in and delivering to homes, especially first-time mothers, and giving them care through 18 months. So one of the things we're doing is something called, and this name, Daisies in Bloom. we'll go with that. It was called Birth Box, right? But it's going to be delivered to, we want Indiana baby girls to grow up healthy and happy. And so we are going to have a box that is delivered to mothers of daughters or caregivers of girls at birth, 6 months, 12 months, 18, all the way through age 5, giving them resources and just a bit of encouragement and links to things like early learning, things, developmental milestones. So that's something we're particularly excited about, because I do think in those areas we're targeting are the moms we're talking about, right? Like, so how can they help see what they need to take care of their own personal health and then help their baby daughter?
Great responses. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
For both of you, what was the most surprising data point that you became aware of through the report?
So I think for us, it was really 2 things. One was the intersectionality of, there was the decrease of positive experiences, right? Girls feeling like they don't have friends, girls feeling like they have nowhere to go after school and on the weekends, with an increase in interpersonal aggression. Things like feeling victims of bullying and sexual violence. Girls feel sexual violence at high school 7 times more often than boys. And so it's those 2 things at a crossroads that really is impacting their mental health. So I would say, and 2 years in a row, right? We had hoped to see, and while we've done the report for 2 years, you can go back and look at the kids count data and see that this is a persistent, and the gaps are widening, not closing. So I would say that whole piece, I wish it were surprising, but I think it was very surprising to see that it's consistently, and it's not getting any better. So I would say probably that for us. And then the other one that was just fascinating, and I do think we've linked it now to this mental health space, is the number of times girls in Indiana are admitted into hospitals is quite a bit higher, 2 times higher than boys, which really also then spoke to, when you really dug underneath that, it was the mental health. The reasons why they're experiencing severe crises in mental health more frequently in boys, and so they're showing up in the emergency rooms and being admitted because there's true health issues there. So it's those things, and then who do we tell, right? Like, are the doctors looking at this? Are the primary care physicians? Are the school nurses? Are the educators? Are the parents? So I think there's a lot of in that was surprising, but also just really fueled the urgency.
I think for me, it was some of those caregiving numbers, and particularly the child care numbers. I'm a bonus mom, so my kids came ready-made. But just, how does a county have the ability to provide childcare for less than half of the people? Like, I don't understand that. Like, I just don't understand how parents can manage that. And the other thing is how often, when you look at the over-indexing of women in poverty and in in Alice, but then compare that to how often women are brought up when people talk about solutions, when we are the ones nurturing families, but we are not the ones targeted with solutions. I guess it wasn't, I don't know if it was surprising, but maddening, more maddening after looking at the.
Yes,
Lily Ledbetter just died, and she was the champion of equal pay for equal work, and President Obama gave her the Medal of Freedom. But we're still not equal in pay to men.
We haven't been equal since I started working, which is over 50 years ago. We have not moved, the needle has not moved since 1970. It's been consistent, so we've made no progress financially in that long time.
Maddening, Martin, good word for that.
Yeah.
Now, we need more women in decision-making positions. As president.
For instance.
I think there's a general, as we peel this back, it's not just one issue or one priority, right? It's the going concern of women to not only address these issues, solve these issues, but again, we're using this word weathering to have to be a solution to a systemic issue that was presented, right, to us. And so I think as we continue the conversation ongoing, how do we simplify it so that there is change, there is action, that we can do this thing, text a friend to say, hey, are you voting? Did you early vote? That we look at and say, for our young women in our lives, if we have this statistic about mental health and about the sexual aggression and also the interpersonal, sexual violence and also the interpersonal aggression, that if it's not being supported and this is an adverse childhood experience, that carries with that woman through to her adult life so that she stops asking. And so then that continuing burdening almost seems as if voting is an ideal. It doesn't change my reality. How can we change the script on that? What are some very specific things that we can do? Phone a friend, or some of these key kind of small tips that we can do as we leave here tonight.
I'll answer from the Girl Scout perspective.
Yeah.
So our mission is to build girls of courage, confidence, and character that make the world a better place. And what we teach in Girl Scouts is making the world a better place isn't the world, it's your world. Is that your house? Is that your neighborhood? Is that your community? Is that your school? Is that your, and then it gets bigger as they get older, right? And so we do see that as a progression in Girl Scouts, that they do raise money at first because they want to do something really small and local. And then they start seeing through bigger and bigger ways that I can make this change. So that's for me, that's where I get the hope, the joy, the opportunity, is watching girls recognize that they can make a difference. So that's where I'm going to hang my hat for a while.
Wonderful, thank you, Danielle.
I think we need to let go of some of our Midwestern niceness and have brave conversations. Because I think the reality, again, when women get together, we can solve a lot of stuff. But what I see a lot of the times, and I will own that I think Women's Fund, historically sometimes, we have this idea that being bipartisan in Central Indiana means we're just not going to talk about anything that's really hard. And you see that's what that's gotten us, a D. So we need to come together and actually talk about these issues so that we can solve them.
May I I did an informal survey, and out of 182 people I talked with, 19 knew who represented them in the Indiana Senate,
Wow.
the Indiana House, Congress, or City Council. And I think if everyone, we can get just to look up and find out who your representative is. We have a supermajority of Republicans in Indiana. We are the 5th most gerrymandered state in the nation. And if we don't vote for women and men who want to make a difference, we're not going to go anywhere.
Great point, thank you so much.
To add to that, we can't participate in the politicization of women's issues. People make our issues political footballs, but these are our lives, women and girls, these are our lives. So we can't be so afraid to engage with politics that we don't talk about our lives. Because our lives quite literally depend on it.
Absolutely.
The democracy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, we are forever grateful that you led us towards these reports that are going to be funneled into readable recommendations that arm us in our conversations in all the stakeholder groups that we are a part of, to showcase and say, this is the purported policy for women and girls throughout the state of Indiana. I think your very inspirational last words bring us to the fact that women are incredibly socially connected, and that we can use our networks to really push forward these recommendations and truly make statewide, hopefully countrywide change as we really look at the data to drive these transformative changes in our state. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.